Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
We take from the thousands of business books out there and test the author's ideas by comparing them to real-world challenges. With over 40 years of projects between us, we've got quite a bit to compare against. We give you the condensed takeaways, followed by our review with the authors.
We know you want actions, not theories, and it's actions that we want to help shape, because that's what the Wicked Podcast is all about, helping you to become a wicked company.
Okay, Marcus, look, yesterday Alex decided to take the trimmers and give me a haircut. And I know that you decided to give yourself a haircut, but both of us need to get either a better beard or a shave. This half measures business is going nowhere.
You don't want to see the back of my... I haven't seen the back of my head because I don't have the right mirrors. And we're living in Zoom era now, so I'm not going to turn my head too much.
All right. But you know what? Regardless of whether we've got a haircut for our heads, we've got really great minds. We've got some really great guests. Who's on the show today?
So today we're talking to Jeff Schwartz and his book called Work Disrupted, which is a pretty extensive book looking at the future of work. So he's been working for Deloitte for a long time. And he's been looking at a lot of new data and research on the future of work and comparing where we were at least a year ago to where we are now. And pretty extensive.
Yeah, I like how he said it's not just work accelerated, it's truly work disrupted. And it really was a great interview. One of the things that I really took away from the particular interview, Jeff was talking about a quote from, I think it was a New York Times writer, that PQ plus CQ is greater than IQ. Your passion quotient plus your curiosity quotient is better or is more powerful than your intellect or your IQ. And I really, really like that. So if people start thinking in today's world, it's not just the specific book knowledge that you know, but your passion for learning and change and adaptation and your curiosity to learn more, those can be really, really incredibly valuable. The other big takeaway, how do I talk to people? How do I talk to clients? It's all about this shift that we're hearing more and more and more away from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism, and finding out how can you do profit and purpose together and build teams and value your employees, and not just talk about your talent quotient as being an asset within the business, but actually start treating them like an asset and making the most value you can out of them. So that's what I took away. But what did you take away today?
Yeah, exactly. We talked a lot about learning, didn't we? So one of the things then I picked up on, and we asked him about it, but the most striking thing was that there was an answer in the form of an actual piece of research, which was shocking and not surprising, as those things often are, which was that leadership and the C-level, or generally the people who manage a transformation, often don't really know that the workers actually want to learn, and that exists across industries, right? So, and I just been in another transformation project where the same conversation is happening, where leadership says, right, okay, so we'll have to get rid of some people, right? And then we have to probably hire new people who have the new talents, who have the new skill sets. That's it. So we hire and fire, we fire old skills and hire new skills. And the whole idea about that people can actually learn is getting often quite minimized. And the reality is that people want to learn. They often have found purpose in their job, and they're more happy than not to actually take it on for the right reasons and go and learn and do a better job. And it's something I think a lot of organizations should be more aware of. So the whole fear, especially when they're running the finances, or how much it's going to cost to, let some people go and hire new ones, which is always really expensive, because the change itself doesn't create any value. You just pay a lot for it before someone is nicely integrated. Is amazing, and I think organizations really have to rethink and understand that actually most people can learn, even into their older years. And I think that we talk a lot about that, and for me, that was the biggest takeaway. It's a misconception that you need to hire and fire when you want to change. It shouldn't happen anymore.
Mm.
Because, and I've seen it in projects. I have evidence for this where organizations where people say, "Oh, it's just an old big tanker. It's not going to move." It's like, no, people surprised me all the time, and it's a really positive view to go now to every leader and go, "No, we can teach them. They want to do stuff. They want to do stuff better. They want to have purpose. Please accept it. They're like you. You're just sitting in a different room. You don't have a different mindset. Yeah. So it was a lovely takeaway, backed by research. It was brilliant.
Yeah, well, like that very much, but enough about you and me kind of wittering on. Why don't we go to the interview?
Yes, let's go to the interview. So, hello everyone, and hello Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm really glad to be here on a cold day in New York.
So we're starting at the top as usual. So let's just start with the first question, which is so there's a lot in your book. Tell us a bit about what the book is about and why you wrote it.
No, thank you for the question. From one sense, I've been working on this book for 7 years. I've been leading the future of work practice at Deloitte for the last 4 or 5, and I've been leading our research in talent and human capital. Wrote an article in 2013 on the open talent economy. It was the early days of the gig economy and crowd work and gig work. And it sort of evolved over time. In 2015, we wrote a piece literally titled Machines as Talent. And it was around that time, 2015, 2016, that I really came upon the thesis for what this book is about and the work I've been doing at Deloitte and how we've been looking at the future of work. And it really comes down to a quote I think summarizes it pretty well. Albert Einstein said, I was joking, you can't go wrong when you start with somebody as brilliant as Albert Einstein. Einstein said that you can't use an old map to explore a new world. And I think that's really the challenge that we are seeing in the future of work. We've certainly seen that in the COVID era. We can go into that, of course, if that's of interest. But what I try to do in the book is to look at the maps and the mental models, if you will, that really help us think about 21st century work and careers in contrast to 20th century maps and mental models. And really the book is organized around comparing how we thought about things decades ago, which are still very much in our minds, those mental models, those pictures, and how we might think about them today. And there are obviously some generational perspectives here as well. So the book is Work Disrupted. And just as we're getting started, I'll point out that the book is not titled Work Accelerated. I think that's been one of the themes of the last few years. I think there's a difference between what happened between 2007 or 8, when a lot of these technologies came to fore, cloud, mobile, a couple of years later, social and AI. But it really is about disruption. It really is about how it's valuable and useful for us as individuals and as organization leaders and as citizens and community members to actually be very deliberate about what these shifts are and how to think differently about work going forward compared to the mental models that we inherited. So that's what I try to do in the book, and I'm really excited to talk about it, as you can tell.
Yeah, and there's really a lot there. And so let me start with, because there's so much there. Let me start with individuals and people in particular learning, because I think we haven't just gone through a massive sort of disruption through technology, and now we're living in a post-COVID world. But what's been going on for a few decades now has been that people need new skill sets, and there's discussion. What are the prime skill set on that? But one of the most striking parts or pieces I found in the book was the study about how much leadership or CEOs actually are aware of that their current workforce wants to learn and have actually a good drive to learn. Whereas, and I just worked on a project like that, a big transformation project, where there's a big discussion always about, well, we have to fire the people who can't keep up, and we have to hire new talent and new capabilities. That's how they like to phrase it. So tell us a bit about that study that actually shows that leadership doesn't seem to really understand its own workers, who are actually quite eager to learn and learn for the right reasons, rather than having to be fired.
No, I love this question. And I think the essence of what we're talking about now is understanding what individuals are capable of and interested in doing, and how they're perceived by managers and business leaders, and even how we build political and public policy organizations around it. So there was a study done by a group at Harvard Business School, led by, among others, Professor Joseph Fuller. It was published in Harvard Business Review last year. And they surveyed workers and managers in 11 countries. And I'll summarize their findings. Here's the way I read their findings, which is when they interviewed and surveyed workers around the world, and not just knowledge workers, but workers in all different types of occupations, manufacturing, service industries, obviously, as well as different services industries. What they found, and it's no surprise to me, is that most workers recognize the need to be adaptable. They recognize the need to learn new skills. They also recognize that their jobs, almost all of, I shouldn't say all of us will be working with and next to smart machines, robots, and AI if we're not doing that already. But in the same study, and some other studies that we've seen, when we interview managers and executives, they tell us that we're not sure the workforce is as adaptable as they need to be. I think what workers are looking for is, and this is the key word, I think, is the opportunity to adapt. I think all of us are looking for um, institutional models. Sorry, that's the way that I talk. I'm trained as an economist, and I have an MBA, and I also have a degree in international economics, so I slip into that lingo sometimes. But people are looking for institutional arrangements that support that. And I'll give a specific example of that. One of the things we talk about in the book is some of the disconnects in education and some of the disconnects in social policy. I'll summarize it this way. A disproportionate amount of our education in most of the world, not all the world, there are some countries in Europe and Asia, France, Germany, Singapore, Denmark, I think are good examples, where ongoing job training and ongoing job transition is part of the model and the social contract, if you will, among individual workers and businesses and government agencies. In other parts of the world, education is very much oriented towards the first part of our lives. You get a lot of educational entitlement between sort of 5 and 22. And after that, you sort of fall off a cliff. And that really doesn't take into account the whole notion of longevity. As our colleagues at London Business School, Linda Grattan and Andrew Scott, wrote their wonderful book, The 100-Year Life, looking at the demography of our times. I have 2 daughters in their 20s. God willing, they can expect to live to be 100. No surprise, our grandparents are in their 80s. But the average time in a job is 3 or 4 years. The half-life of a skill is 5 years or dropping. Many of us can expect to have 12 or 14 jobs or careers, which means that this ongoing process of reinvention, which is a little bit different than lifelong learning, is really important. And I think we're seeing this over and over again, this question of adaptability and how people are responding and how leaders are leading. And let me give one other example as we're getting started. In 2020, I know we're recording this early in 2021, we saw remarkable adaptability in the workforce. Right? We saw, in the U.S., where I have the data at my fingertips, we went from 5% of the workforce working remotely to 50%. That's 10x. We're seeing a lot of 10x as well, which we can go into. But we also saw something else. We saw the automotive industry being thrown the challenge of, in addition to making cars, can you put your capabilities into making ventilators? To me, that's a wonderful story of adaptability. A car is a very complicated machine, which is with about 2,000 parts. I didn't know that until we did the research. And a ventilator is another complicated machine with 700 parts. And as you can expect, there isn't a lot of overlap between the parts in a car and the parts in a ventilator. There's a tiny bit. But what we were able to do, and what automotive workers and managers were able to do, was to sort of take a step forward and look at what their deep capabilities were, what their capabilities were to design, to source, to assemble, to distribute, going from one complicated product, in one case the automobile, to a ventilator. And we've seen that kind of adaptability. And to me, that's just one example. I've talked about the institutional requirement. That's one example where recognizing that people are adaptable if we give them the opportunity and the support to actually exercise that adaptability. It also goes back to this first point that we're exploring, which is, what's the mental model we have? Individuals, I think, are looking for opportunity, and many business leaders are looking for the perfect fit, right? And they don't actually think of the workforce as flexible and as adaptable as it truly is, or it truly could be, if we organized and managed around that.
Yeah, that reminds me when you talk about the automotive, because I remember a few years back I worked with an automotive company and to design electric bike, and when we presented there, they were going like, "Oh, we need all these new suppliers, all these new things. Therefore, we probably can't do it." And you compare electric bike to a ventilator, you probably are not far off in terms of like, it's still quite different, right? So it's all about, they could have done it if they wanted to. It seems to be a lot about incentive, and if someone actually just wants to do it, the flexibility is there. And I see it the same with when I work with people like enterprise architects who have a particular way of tracking, measuring, and designing and noticing or not noticing the flexibility with their own tools. So I'm curious there then, if we say the flexibility is there, so what do you think is the main thing then to, apart from recognizing it, what do you think then is the main thing to do? Can we just go and say, you know what, there is a study, we know it, let's just do it? What do you think might be then the main blocker after recognizing for organizations to actually do it? Because we now have evidence that they can. What's the usual blocker then?
So let me bring in some other research that we've done to sort of set the stage and really build on this question. At Deloitte, we do an annual report called the Human Capital Trends Report. We've been doing it for 11 years. I was involved when we started in 2011. So we've been looking at many of these questions for over a decade. Sort of interesting to remember that when we started this report in 2011, we were looking over our shoulder at the last big economic crisis, which was the Great Recession. And we followed the Great Recession with a Great Reset. Richard Florida wrote a book by that name in 2010. So we're sort of familiar with some of these patterns. But we saw in the research that we did, and we did a survey last September and October, which is really good timing, because September and October of 2020, we were 7, 8, 9 months, depending on where you are in the world, into the COVID era. And we focused on 3 really major findings. One finding was, how do business leaders think about crises? And we saw a really interesting shift. We asked people, how did you think about crisis management before COVID, and how are you thinking about it as you're preparing for the post-COVID era? Although we're not quite in the post-COVID era yet. We're working through the recovery. And the big shift we saw in that first question was a view of crisis management from, I'll call it the historical view of business continuity. We sort of know what the expected disruptions are. and we focus on a sort of small number of anticipated disruptions, known knowns, if you will, and we prepare for them. And what we saw executives saying is, you know what, we need in the future to be much more prepared for multiple scenarios, and we need to be prepared for unknown and uncertain possibilities. Right now, we're in the middle of this right now as we're recording this. That sort of makes sense. One way of thinking about that is we weren't even thinking about adaptability. We weren't thinking about the need for adaptability. Second question we asked was, what are the most important things to focus on as you're shifting from responding and recovering from the pandemic to a post-pandemic world? And we gave them a long list, more digital technology, more money. Interestingly, the top two responses were, number one, the adaptability and the flexibility of our workforce, the ability of our workforce to reskill, what we've just been talking about. And number two was the ability of our organization to act in a decentralized way to make rapid decisions, a sort of team of team approach. And then the third question we asked was, how are you thinking about work transformation? Right? What are you doing about work? And we asked again, pre-COVID and post-COVID, how are you thinking about it? And we gave three basic choices. We said, are you thinking about work transformation in terms of optimization? Are you trying to do the same things you've been doing more efficiently with a higher level of productivity, faster? Are you trying to redesign work to substitute technology for labor? Or are you looking at reimagining work? Literally thinking through not only increasing output, but how can we increase and create new outcomes? How can we do new things? And how can we create new combinations of people and technology and teams? This was a pretty dramatic piece of data for those of us who love data. 29% said before COVID, their focus was on reimagining work. Pretty much 70% said optimizing and redesigning. After COVID, their post-COVID view was reimagination went from 29% to 61%. So more than 6 out of 10 business leaders, again, this is September, October, saying, you know what? We need to not only focus on productivity, we need to focus on reimagination. At Deloitte, we call it re-architecting work because we think it's not enough to imagine the future. You actually need to build it as well. So we think of reimagination in motion, if you will, as re-architecture. The reason I summarize that data is what all these three have in common is that they are shifts in management perspective. They are shifts in the perspective that workers have, and they are shifts in the perspective in the way that we think about it as citizens and public policymakers. I think this right now may be one of the biggest challenges as we are in this pivot, hopefully, from the extended recovery to the post-COVID period, which we call the Thrive period. It's our optimistic view of what happens next, is can we make these shifts in mental models so that we are thinking about reimagination, that we are putting re-architecting work, that we're putting reskilling and adaptability and fast decisions at the center of what we're doing. And right now, we're not designed for almost any of this. We are designed for optimization and process standardization. We are designed for around linear supply chain views of labor. This goes to what I was talking about. We were discussing a second ago when we were talking about the automotive companies making ventilators and healthcare workers, and what we've seen in call center workers going from working in the hospitality industry to working for government contact centers and centers that are trying to help people get through the vaccine lines. What really matters in terms of adaptability is having a mental mindset that looks at what people are capable of doing, what their potential is. And let me put it another way. What we found in 2020 was it didn't really matter what we recruited you to do. It didn't really necessarily matter what your job description was. It didn't even matter what were the previous jobs that you had done for us. What really mattered was what you could do. And could we figure that out? And did we have institutional and management practices that allowed us to redeploy people quickly, recognizing that most of the people that work for us, and many of them aren't our employees, have skills and capabilities and interests that we're just not really aware of. And we can go into that a little bit more. We've seen the growth of talent marketplaces. We've seen the growth of choice and agency among workers that has really helped us as business leaders and managers find what that potential is, so that we could do things that that were not in our plan at the end of 2019. Nobody had a plan in the fourth quarter of 2019 for what happened in 2020. And what we were called upon to do was to actually be agile everywhere, not just in our software practice and our technology practices, but to apply these ideas much more broadly.
So it's really, really great data and great insights as well. Can we shift a bit to one of your other big topics in the book, which is the evolution of gig working and flexibility of how employment actually works? If you listen to any of the other podcasts, you know that I'm going to typically, trot out Milton Friedman's old quote that the only purpose of a corporation is within the rules to make profit. And the primary purpose is protecting shareholders. Employees, customers, society at large, and the environment take a distant second, third, fourth, and fifth. And I believe that kind of gig working is a response to the fact that companies focused exclusively on profit at the expense of employees. But how do you see, in our current times, companies shifting more towards stakeholder capitalism and bringing that into the workforce in the way they're reimagining or re-architecting work?
So that's a great question, but I think it's at least two questions in one. It may be more than two questions. So let me try to address both of them sequentially and then tie them together. There's the question about where we are in the evolution from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And then there's a question on the growth in the different types of employment and worker arrangements, and how those worker arrangements fit into the different social and corporate contracts that we have. I think those are the two questions. That's what I heard. Look, I'm not an expert. Okay, great. I'm not an expert, but I'm along with you all, a keen observer on the evolution of where we are in stakeholder capitalism. Again, I referred to the human capital trends research we've been doing at Deloitte. I think it's 4 years ago now that we pivoted our research to look at the social enterprise as the way that we viewed where corporate strategy was going. So we've been viewing everything that we do relative to human capital and business strategy through the social enterprise lens. And for us, the social enterprise really encompassed two aspects, two dimensions that seem to be accelerating at different rates around the world, obviously. One was the evolution of the interdependence or the relationship between profit and purpose. We're not the first people to talk about it, but when we wrote about this 4 years ago, this was the early days when people were looking at what BlackRock was talking about, when Larry Fink started talking about it. Then a couple of years ago, we saw the Business Roundtable. And, in 2020, when we found that we were faced with a health crisis and an economic crisis, and at least in the US and some parts of the world, a social and a racial equality crisis, that the integration of these two issues has really come to the forefront. And that is having, at least right now, an impact on, what the role is of corporations and what the role is and the expectations of governments. I'll say my hope, it's not even a guess or a prediction, is that we're going to continue to see the acceleration of stakeholder capitalism, or what we call the social enterprise. The other aspect of the social enterprise that we looked at was the other side of the question that you've asked, which is we looked at the relationship between the company and the community and society, and obviously the environment, profit and purpose. but we also looked at it from the perspective of the company and the ecosystem, right? And historically, we've thought of the company relative to its balance sheet, its income statement, its corporate legal boundaries, right? And the other element, if you will, dimension of the social enterprise, one is profit and purpose. The other is, are we focused on our employees, or are we also focused on all the people that directly or indirectly are part of the production and the services that we provide? We're doing a lot of research now, including with MIT, on what we call the driving the future of work through workforce ecosystems. We're not the first group to point out, but we're one of the groups to highlight that increasingly for many, many, many companies, a significant percentage of their workers are not traditional employees, right? Some of the largest tech companies in the world, you look at their numbers, they have 2,000 people, 200,000 people in their workforce, 100,000 have a corporate ID card, and 100,000 have other ID cards. They could be consultants, managed service workers, gig workers. Some of them don't have any card at all. They're crowd workers. They're working in crowd competitions. What we've been looking at is the alternative, we'll call it the alternative workforce. I mentioned earlier when we were getting started, the first piece of research we did on this in 2013 looked at the open talent continuum, the open talent economy. And, you know, there's some really interesting dynamics here, which we can go into. There are different reasons that people are hiring and accessing talent, not just acquiring talent through these alternative means. But there's a significant regulatory and public policy issue here, which is if we want to provide incentives so that we can provide flexibility in work, so that you can be a full-time employee or a part-time employee, or you might be a data scientist or a creative designer who doesn't want to work for a company full-time, likes the idea of having a portfolio. One of the things we're trying to figure out around the world is how do we create portable benefits, micro benefits, benefit programs that provide both labor protections, unemployment protection, job transition protection, healthcare protection to workers regardless of the employment and the workforce model that they have. That's really a piece of work that is in progress. I think it's going to be something we're going to see a lot of attention paid to in the next couple of years. And we've seen it in the pandemic. We've seen countries around the world providing government assistance to categories of employees that historically haven't been included in recovery programs, in part because the percentage of people who are working these alternative arrangements are so high. We have to make choices going forward as to, are we going to provide that flexibility, but do it in a way that alternative workers aren't on side streets, but are on well-lit streets where they actually have the same benefits and the same entitlements, regardless of the employment contract that they have. It's a lot of work to be done there.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Unfortunately, we're running almost out of time, so I'm going to give it back to Marcus, who's got one last question, if you don't mind.
Of course.
Yeah. Always more questions than time. It's probably a common problem everyone has. But thank you so far for being very elaborate on your answers and giving us so many insights. So let's close with a bit of a Steckenpferd of mine, with a bit of a personal favorite of mine. So if you're talking about flexibility in particular in the workforce, you're talking about people who might go into the gig economy or generally, have sort of portfolio careers where they just move through various different areas with different skill sets. So one of the questions that keeps coming up here, and I just been this week a bit on a festival called the Polymath Festival. It's been very academic, but there's academic high interest on polymath. So the question obviously there is jack of all trade, or polymath, or specialist, and is the time of the specialist somewhat over? Moving forward, given the new complexities of contemporary and future problems, are the jack of all trades and the polymath outpacing the specialist in terms of relevance, and what does it mean maybe to learning and people and their careers? What's your view?
So I've said already to an earlier question, I love the question. I love this question as well. I think this is really one of the central questions that we're all looking at, regardless of your age, whether you're a teenager or in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, or 70s. We're asking similar questions. And sort of two quick dimensions on this. One, um, Tom Friedman, who's the columnist for the New York Times and a writer, um, sort of said two things about this that I think are really relevant. He said, "Look, what's really relevant is that we need to be lifelong learners, which we've all been hearing for a long time, but we need to actually build that into what we do as individuals." But he has a wonderful expression. He talks about his perspective is that PQ plus CQ is greater than IQ. PQ is passion quotient. CQ is curiosity quotient. And what Tom says, and I agree with him, and many of the people who work with us at the Center for the Edge, John Hagel and John C. Brown, have talked about passion and curiosity. But that passion and curiosity and your ability to be a learner really are more important than specific IQ or really knowledge or skills in a particular area. And the other way that we look at this, and this is a big challenge for all of us, it goes back to that longevity dividend that we were talking about a few minutes ago. You live to be 100, God willing. You work for 50 or 60 years. What really matters is your ability to reinvent yourself. What matters is what we would characterize as enduring human capabilities, essential human capabilities. By the way, we're not calling them soft skills. We're calling them something else, because these are the underlying capabilities. It's sort of like, if I were to use a metaphor, it's like a machine tool, right? A machine tool allows you to create multiple parts, multiple manufacturing outputs, because the machine tool has the capability to do many things. And the big challenge right now, both for us as individuals and companies and also public policy perspective, is to actually think through really, really hard, how do we focus on those enduring human capabilities and how do we actually use them? And it's a very big question, but one of the themes of my book, Work Disrupted, um, we talked to some amazing technical experts, John C. Brown, who led Xerox PARC, and the head of talent at AWS. And, these are really heavy duty techies. And when we asked them a similar question, they talked about things like passion and curiosity. They talked about viewing the world as a historian, or Gillian Tett, who's the one of the senior writers at the Financial Times, talked about, and I'll sort of end with this. She talked about the view of a cultural anthropologist, but to be really clear about it, her view is that you need to, if you're a fish, you need to be able to see the water. And what we need to be able to see right now is the environments and the context in which we're swimming, in which we're operating, so that we can actually make choices around that.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it's funny you mentioning Julian, because she was over at the festival actually talking about silos. So
one of my favorite books. We actually quote her extensively. We have a chapter on organization strategies going forward, looking at networks, teams, and platforms. And we interviewed Jillian for the book, and she had, she wrote that great book, The Silo Effect, 5 years ago, which is in part her analysis of what happened in the last financial crisis. And I think it's extremely relevant today. How we're using silos, and are we aware of them? And are we aware of what their benefits are and what their limitations are? And our ability to work horizontally. And this goes to your polymath question. I think the other element of that is, as I mentioned, I was teaching a class at Cornell's MBA program this morning. And the generation of people who are studying now are wired for horizontal and team working in ways that some of our senior executives, including myself, we were not schooled on that. We were schooled on vertical careers, up or out careers, not this idea of horizontal and sort of connected worlds and connected teams.
No, it's really wonderful to hear that. It's one of the luxuries of this podcast as well, to hear the same themes everywhere and to slowly and surely bring the puzzle pieces together for us all to better understand what to do about it. Because everyone's been feeling these things for a while, but no one, it takes a bit further to experiment and see what actions we can take forward on that. Now that we know, and now that we definitely have to, which has just accelerated. Thank you so much for your time, Jeff, and thank you so much for all your insights and your wonderful answers. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, guys. I enjoyed it. Cheers.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.